Hey everyone. I wanted today to really hone in on something that is difficult to talk about. And so today I want to talk about grief. I wanted to also share that next week we will not have a Q&A meeting because next week I will be practicing my own grief ritual for my father who passed away a year ago. And I wanted to talk a little bit about grief today because I think it's really important for us to acknowledge that it exists and to not get so busy that we don't sit with our emotions and our feelings and learn how to take the opportunity for integration of our feelings and really sit with them and understand them. So I'm going to share my screen. All right. So, what exactly is grief? The Mayo Clinic states that grief is a strong, sometimes overwhelming emotion for people, regardless of whether their sadness stems from the loss of a loved one or from a terminal diagnosis that they or a loved one has received. Now, I would like to take that one step further. So, grief can also be caused, or this strong emotion of grief can also be caused by a perception of loss or even a loss that isn't a death. So, our expectation, our loss of our expectations. So, we can grieve when we have a child with a special need, or that child doesn't meet their developmental milestone the way that we were expecting, or an expectation of something big in our lives has been dashed and we no longer have that thing that we hoped for. So for example, you can grieve when you miss that promotion, or when someone you were expecting to come and visit are not coming. So there are reasons, many more reasons to grieve than just losing a loved one. And I think that our culture pushes down the opportunity to grieve or the expectation of grief so much so that it actually creates this situation where we don't allow ourselves to even realize that we're grieving in some of those quote unquote less grief worthy situations and scenarios. So you will hear things if you have a special needs child. Well, at least you have a child. Or you always wanted to enjoy those baby years, 5 years after the child is born. It's not helpful. And for those of you that are around people that are grieving, sit with them, give them the opportunity to grieve, allow them to grieve. Don't justify, changing and not grieving. Let the tears flow, let the grief happen. That's so important. And don't feel like their grief situation isn't enough because you don't live in their world. You don't live in their emotions. You don't live in their expectations. And so giving them and honoring them and giving them the opportunity to experience their grief and work through their grief. So there are basically 7 stages of grief. And we're going to talk about each of those stages, but we're also going to talk about the fact that not every stage is followed exactly in these orders. It's not one, two, three, four, five. It's this and those both at the same time and backwards to these others you've already experienced. So it's all different directions. So, the stages of grief that most people go through are: first, shock and denial. No, this can't be happening. I can't believe this is happening. I don't want this to happen. It's not really happening. And we go through this time if you're experiencing someone who has just been given a terminal diagnosis, like my father did. He was told he had terminal cancer. It was not fixable. And so being able to say, okay, you know no, this isn't true. We're going to push through and try to, but it was terminal. There was no more or anything more that they felt that they could do for him. And so there was shock, there was denial. This isn't going to beat me. I'm going to make sure I overcome this, even though the recommendations were it's probably not going to be a way to fix this. Then there's pain and guilt, especially when you lose someone. There's pain in the loss, but there's also guilt. You feel like I should have done more. I should have done differently. I should have. And, we talk about can't shit on ourselves because we did what we could do. And sometimes what we can do is just what we do and not to feel guilty, of things you should have done or guilt over, what should have happened or could have happened. Then we can experience anger and even bargaining with the divine and saying, just take me instead. I also lost my brother this past year, and my mother was bargaining a lot. Why didn't you take me? He was young. He was too young. He was younger than I am, and there was a lot of bargaining of what is wrong with this world? Why am I the one still here? And anger toward the divine, saying, why did you do this? I'm so angry with you. And these are normal feelings that you will have when you're dealing with grief. If you've got a child with special needs, why God did this happen? Why is this happening? Guilt. What did I do wrong? Could I have saved this child from having this special need? Was there something I did while I was pregnant? Was there something that I should have done while I was pregnant? There's so many pieces. Then sometimes we go through a time of depression. That can be short or very long. Sometimes we think we've gotten to a place of acceptance and depression will hit again. We'll remember, that time that you spent or that, a moment with that person and you become melancholy and, maybe your mood goes a little bit downward. And then there will be times where the mood picks up and you'll feel better and you'll have an upward turn. But then that those depressive symptoms can come back. Don't expect that they're gone for good. Um, the upward turn, we're okay. The person is not here with us and we're sad, but you know, we're no longer having severe depression. Again, that doesn't mean that that depression isn't going to come back. All of these, there's no timeline for these different stages, and there's no order to these different stages. And we will cycle through them, through different ones, and go back and forth. Then there's some reconstruction and some integration, some working through. There are times when, you allow yourself to grieve and it doesn't last as long. It's not as strong, and it's okay for it not to be as strong. Sometimes we'll feel guilt again because, well, I should be really sad and I should be crying more. Don't feel guilty. You're working through, you're reconstructing your life without that person in it. And that's okay too. Don't feel guilty because you're not feeling that emotion as strongly. And then there's a time when, once we've been working through that grief, we find a place of hope and an acceptance. Sometimes the hope is in, life is still going, and we have a chance to make things better for those that we are around. Maybe the process of grief that you've experienced, you can go back and say to someone else, I understand, and I don't have a problem and I'm not uncomfortable just sitting with you in that grief and allowing you to share your anger, share your pain and guilt, share your denial, share your depression. And I'm not uncomfortable in that space because I've been there and I understand it. And so hope that we can help others and hope that an acceptance that, this is a part of life. When you get to that place of acceptance, you'll be able to not only accept, but be able to share
your experiences with others and understand the grief that they've experienced and be able to sit with them and hold space for them without giving them the excuses to, that I talked about earlier, that, well, it's okay, and she's in a better place, or he's fill in the blank, whatever, you've heard, or, just get over it, you'll be all right. This will pass. I mean, we hear so many things. And the reality is, even if it's just perceived loss, or if it's the loss of something simple to the rest of the world, it's still grief. I was recently in a community meeting with some people that one of the people there had experienced um, a wonderful experience. And afterwards, she began to grieve because she missed that experience, because she felt so renewed in that space, and she wasn't there anymore, and she was grieving. And that grief is just as real as a grief of a loss of a loved one. And she went through all of these stages of denial and anger and pain and just feeling bad, a lot of anger. She's working through a lot of anger because she missed that experience. She enjoyed that experience, but she didn't want to leave that experience. And so, that sounds like, oh, but that's not a real loss. It is. It is a real loss. People experience grief in losses of a job, or a loss of a pet, a beloved pet, or the loss of, we can lose, an expected child, or even an expected child that is born but has a disability. All of those things, an expected milestone. As a parent of a child with a disability, every time my child didn't meet that expected milestone, I grieved again. And sometimes I think with families with special needs children, you don't even realize that every single time a new expectation is dashed, that you're going through this grief process all over again. It takes you back to the beginning of denial and shock and pain and guilt. And maybe I could have done something different, or maybe I should have done it better. Maybe I should have, again, don't shit on yourself. Doesn't feel good. And it's not necessary. And really, um, that's something that I think we should all take a step back and say, we don't live in the bodies and the minds of everyone else. And learn, even if you've not had a great loss, even the smallest loss can prepare you to sit and hold space for those that are grieving. And I think that's our acceptance and our hope. That's our place of acceptance. That's our place of hope. And just as I'm going to honor my dad in this coming week, um, and I will be experiencing the crying and experiencing the emotions that come with my grief, I'm also going to experience the hope and the acceptance that the divine has put in place for us as we go through this life. And so that's all I wanted to bring you today. Nothing fancy or exciting, but just an opportunity to reframe grief, to be willing to allow it, and not to make it that uncomfortable place that we seem to find ourselves in, whether we're grieving or whether others are grieving and we're there in their midst and holding space for them. So let's embrace it. Embrace that grief. Embrace the emotions. Feel them, sit with them, allow them, instead of making ourselves too busy to experience.